Hey everyone, my name is Francisco Lopez, and for my final project, I wanted to compare two films that have been known to be very similar in story and in characters. The first film follows two high school boys on their quest to a party where they might experience their first sexual experience. Several obstacles get in their way as they desperately try to get to this party, but we soon realize that this film becomes a story about bromances. The second film also follows two high school teens on their quest to a party, except this time we are guided by two girls. Their quest, however, isn't to seek sex like in Superbad, but in Booksmart, the two female protagonists find out that they have been choosing books and grades over high school parties and memories. While it worked out for them, their peers also got into great colleges while being able to party themselves and have fun. So we follow our main protagonist on a journey to create one last memory the night before graduation. Because of the similar narrative beats that both films execute, I wanted to talk about the many differences that Booksmart chose to make compared to Superbad. Besides the two main characters being of the opposite sex, Booksmart's attention to the female perspective as well as its comedic form tell a completely different story. And by looking at their similarities through the narrative structure, we can start to uncover how very different these two films are. Since these films were made in two distinct eras, reading the critical response of both Superbad and Booksmart can provide context to the culture from that time period as well as the comedic form. Looking at the critical response to Superbad, you can see a positive critical consensus. With the audience reception being the same, Superbad is a film that many consider to be a modern comedy classic, with critics like Roger Ebert calling it a four-letter rancharama with the heart, and others like Richard Propst describing it as an intelligent and occasionally insightful look at the sometimes scary place we call the adolescent male mind. We can see the cultural resonance that this film had back in 2007. More than a decade later, Booksmart comes out with the same critical response with an overwhelmingly positive reception, with critics like Christy Lemire praising it by saying it's raunchy and kind of gross at times, but there is such heart, sweetness, and honesty about high school. So not only are Booksmart and Superbad similar in the narrative sense, but they are also similar in how they were received critically, with both of them being praised by critics and audiences alike. Now, let's start by analyzing both of the characters in Booksmart and seeing how they navigate throughout the film. Our first character, Molly, is a future Yale commit and is getting ready to graduate with the highest of honors. Her peers start to make fun of her because of her stuck up personality, quote unquote. And because of this, she feels bad and starts to come at them with all of her achievements and her accolades. In trying to make them feel bad, she realizes that she has messed up and has seriously underestimated her peers because all of them have gone into great schools with scholarships, job offers, and good grades. In this moment, she realizes that all of her hard work of not going to parties, studying every night, trying to get those A's in classes might have not been the best way to go about it, since her peers did both. They got good grades and they got to make memories in high school. Molly then convinces Amy to come to this party with her so they can make one last good memory before graduation. Our second character, Amy, really doesn't care about all of this, but because Molly is her best friend, she goes along with it. This goes to show the dynamic between the two characters. The same type of dynamic is still present in Superbad with our two main characters, Seth and Evan. Seth is the one who finds out about Jules's party and tells Evan to come along. The reason why the boys want to go to this party is because they want to ultimately end up with the girl. Seth wants to end up with Jules, and Evan wants to end up with Becca. So now that we've compared Superbad and Booksmart's plots, we can finally begin to distinguish their differences. Superbad's male perspective really does shine through in how Seth and Evan treat each other. Even the way they talk gives you a look into the male perspective. In the beginning of the film, Seth and Evan mention a lot of bro knowledge, or what is commonly known as bro knowledge, such as mentioning filmmakers like the Coen brothers or Orson Welles, and even mentioning the Beatles at one point. They speak about sex, and they commonly refer to girls as good fuckers in front of cashiers. And we definitely get to see a lot of the male gaze throughout the entirety of the film, which, in feminist theory, the male gaze is the act of depicting women and the world in the visual arts and in literature from a masculine, heterosexual perspective that presents and represents women as sexual objects for the pleasure of heterosexual male viewers. With the film being written by two men and directed by a man, you can definitely see the male perspective take over with our main characters Seth and Evan. And it makes sense, especially when given the fact that this film takes place in high school and the writing is a commentary on how ignorant and how absurd boys are at this age. But over the years, this perspective has changed. Time and time again, Superbad has been picked apart by feminist studies, in which they focus on certain elements of the film that can be considered problematic. One example comes from the Chicago Tribune back in 2018, where they talk about rape and sexual assault in certain types of films, like Superbad. Suhara Morty is a professor of gender, sexuality, and feminist studies at Middlebury College, and this is what she has to say. The people who make these types of films probably don't see themselves endorsing rape, but the humor is derived from the ineptitude of these teenage boys, and sexual assault gets folded into that and it becomes an accessory to the humor, so it has a trivializing effect, a sanitizing effect. The author of this article also gives her 2 cents on the film. She states, "You can't escape the nasty premise, no matter how humorously it's dressed up. No matter how exuberantly it's passed off as teenage raunch. Of course the movie doesn't paint the boys as monsters. That's what makes this trope so effective. They're not the villains here." So despite its rise in popularity, we can see that Superbad has gained some valid criticism over its themes. It's a complete 180 when we look at Booksmart's main characters. They're the ones that have to deal with the toxic masculinity in the high school that they attend. Molly and Amy are known feminists in the school, and they try their best to fit in. Molly is very supportive of Amy. Amy is a lesbian in the film, and she gets very nervous trying to talk to other girls, and Molly is the one that motivates her to do so. The characters in this film really try to bring up one another, and that goes to show the female perspective. Molly and Amy have this thing where they always try to hype each other up whenever they see each other in a new outfit. So you can see the care and the unique perspective that Olivia Wilde brings to the table when directing Booksmart. And I think that's why it's so great to have the female perspective not only in front of the camera but behind the camera as well, writing and directing. The friendship in Booksmart I think is handled with a lot of care, especially with Olivia Wilde's direction and writing. Molly and Amy really do care for each other, and it shows throughout their acting and also in the writing. And as a man, you can totally see the perspective of 2 girls just trying to be friends, trying to work out certain problems, and it really is relatable in that way. Whereas in Superbad, the male perspective really does take over at the end of the film, when it's a very unique experience that men have. We really don't show our emotions, or we don't see our emotions being portrayed on the big screen as much as we do with women. So whenever Seth and Evan say that they love each other at the very end of the film, it means something. And even though they were drunk and they don't remember the whole situation, they still have come to terms with what they've said. And growing up and growing apart is a big deal, especially in this era of high school, being a senior, heading into college. It's a big step, and Booksmart has similar elements, but it tackles it in a very different way because of the female perspective. This concludes my video. Thanks for watching, everyone, and here is my works cited page.